Well, a very good morning to you. Hi, my name is Kasim or Cass, and welcome back again to Journal Entries. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining me. This week, what I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about a topic that has been in my subreddit, in my Substack, that I wrote about, which I entitled "Having a Father as a Sex Offender, and Why Does a Boy Seeing His Father Get Arrested Fuck Him Up So Much?" A little while ago, I was working online with a client, and that we were working through social anxiety, we were working through stress, we were working through depression. And the reason is because this client had not left his house. This client had not left his house in months, and it was making him isolated, and it was impacting his mental health, and he didn't feel like he could go outside, mainly because he felt like he would be judged. And I was trying to figure out where all of this was coming from. And for about, it would be what, 2 months into the sessions, the client hadn't disclosed any information to me about the origins of where this was coming from. And so we were starting to explore it and dig deeper. And eventually the client disclosed to me that the what he believed was the reason, because we were working through theories and we were trying to sort of piece together this puzzle of what had led to the depression and the isolation. And really the backstory of these series of events that led up to where he was mentally. Because I think one of the things that's really important for us to understand as people is that rarely does one event cause our mental health to decline. Rarely does one event cause our life to start unraveling and spiraling. It's typically an accumulation of different things. In trauma therapy, there is something called big T traumas and small T traumas. So big T traumas are things like you are in a car crash, you are in a natural disaster, you go through a rape, you're in a car crash. Those are what are called big T traumas. And then there are what are called small T traumas. So small T traumas are small traumas that accumulate over time. So things like being bullied, being isolated, people denying your sexuality, you're not coming out or living in secrecy. It can be things like people telling you you're worthless, you're pathetic. Um, all of these things, they're not in the great scheme of things, massive things, but when you start adding them up, what happens is that they compound, they add onto one another, and they eventually become catastrophic. And the person can feel trapped, they can feel isolated, and they can feel like nobody understands them, and they can get into an emotional and psychological state where it's like, how do I even begin to where do I start with this? Like, there are so many things that have happened, and so many of them have been layered upon layered, and so many of them have been unprocessed, and so many of them have been unresolved that they're causing me all kinds of issues, and I just don't know where to begin with it. And that's kind of sometimes where people end up in therapy because they need to be able to untangle and process each thing individually. And sometimes, when people come to therapy, one of the things I say to them is they'll say, well, how long is this going to last? How am I going to be here for 2 weeks? Am I going to be here for a month? And I'll say to them, it depends. It depends on what you're coming into therapy for. It depends what we want to talk about. But when we are looking at issues where there is compounded small traumas, what can end up happening is we may be in therapy for a year, we may be in therapy for 2 years, because there are so many things that individually we're going to have to talk about, we're going to have to process, we're going to have to untangle. And then as we untangle that, other things will come up: anger, frustration, resentment. And then we're going to have to deal with that, and we just have to keep going. And sometimes, as I say, it can take up to a year, 2 years to actually untangle some of this stuff. So anyway, the client then disclosed to me that the reason why he was feeling like this is because, and what he believed led up to this, is because his father was on the sex offenders register. And I had never worked with somebody whose father was on the sex registers offenders register. Um, and the client really actually uh, taught me a lot, because there were these nuanced things that the client taught me that I'd never really thought about. And I did a lot of research whilst I was working with this class and afterwards. It's interesting because many people don't realize that actually, for me, when it comes the way that I work in my life, both in my books and both in therapy, is that I study and equip myself based on who I'm trying to help and who I'm trying to support. You know, some people they're like, I want to be an accountant, and then people are going to come to me. For me, it's actually the other way around. I wanted to work with people who needed support, and then I wanted to go mental health support or psychological, emotional support, and then I was going to go and equip myself in order to be able to develop the skills, the knowledge to be able to support this person. And so this client taught me a lot because I went and studied all about this topic and took CPD on it and all kinds of different things. And anyway, my point is that one of the reasons why I ended up actually really focusing my counseling practice of boys and men is because I began to realize that a lot of boys and men, a lot of the things that they've gone through are stigmatized, or they are being brought up in families where there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of things that have happened, but nobody is talking about it. There is a lot of shame. There's a lot of secrecy, and this ends up impacting the boy or the man, and then this later on affects his family, and the cycle repeats and repeats over and over again. And I wanted to create a space in my therapy room where anyone, any boy or man could, well, or woman, anyone really, or they, or however they present, could come into my therapy room and they could talk about anything without shame, without being judged, without feeling like what they're going to share with me is going to overwhelm me because as Kasim, believe one of my great assets and one of my great benefits to this planet and to the world, and to the people I interact with is that I have the capacity to be able to handle a lot. I can handle a lot more. I've noticed than the average person, which and it gives me a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy for people, mainly because I myself have made a lot of mistakes and I have gone through a lot myself. So, I wrote this Substack the other day about this topic, and I wanted to share some things with you in it. Hopefully, you might find it useful. You can go and find it at kasimkawesa.substack.com if you want to read it, but it will be live, and you may find it useful. So I'm going to just read through some of the things that I wrote on it. I might jump back and forth out of it just to explain or expand on a couple of things, but I hope you find it useful, and that's what I wanted to talk about in this particular podcast. So, as I said, I entitled it Having a Father as a Sex Offender and Why Does a Boy Seeing His Father Get Arrested Fuck Him Up? When we picture a sex offender, we rarely think of them as a father pushing a child on a swing, standing at the school gate, or tucking their son into bed at night. But in the UK today, many sex offenders are indeed fathers, and thousands of children are quietly growing up in the long shadow of their crimes. According to the most recent figures, there's approximately 95,844 registered sex offenders in England and Wales, with an additional 4,358 in Scotland. While the public registry tells us how many people are being that many of these people are being monitored for sex offences. What it does not reveal is how many of these individuals have children. There is no national statistics that answer this directly. Yet we can look at the surrounding evidence, and the reality then becomes very clear and even more unsettling because a government data matching exercise from 2012 found that around 24 to 31% of female offenders had one or more children under the age of 18. While similar data for male offenders is not published, it would be naive of us to assume that the numbers are significantly lower. In fact, I would say that the numbers are significantly higher. In fact, many male offenders were fathers before their crimes came to light, meaning that their children are often caught in the crossfire, collateral damage that unfolds as all of this comes out into the general public. Each month, approximately 300 families in England and Wales are impacted by a parent, often the father, who is arrested for online child sex offences. That's 3,600 families a year and potentially thousands of children's lives, which are permanently altered. As Deputy Chief Constable Ian Critchley said, there are the hidden victims of sexual crimes. right? The sons and the daughters of sex offenders who suffer in silence. Their names aren't in court transcripts, their pictures aren't shown on the news, but the consequences for them are no less traumatic. These children often experience profound emotional, psychological, and social harm. Some are bullied or ostracized when others discover their parents' offenses. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment because this is really, really important. Others internalize shame, confusion, or even guilt, trying to reconcile the image of their parent of the parent that they loved with the actions that led up to their arrest. And some tragically end up repeating the cycle. Research from Quest Advisory shows that 65% of boys with fathers in prison go on to be involved in the criminal justice system themselves. Despite this, the legal and therapeutic systems are still poorly equipped to support these children. There is no consistent process for tracking the welfare of children whose fathers are placed on the sex offenders register. Local authorities may intervene when safeguarding risks are high, but many children fall through the cracks, especially if the offending parent is no longer living in the home or if the offense was historic rather than recent. We must also confront another uncomfortable truth, which is that many sex offenders convicted of these offenses against children were not strangers. They were fathers, stepfathers, uncles, or family members. In the UK, more than half of all convicted child sex child child sexual abuse offenders are classified as pedophiles, and the vast majority are male. This further complicates the picture because this means that some children grow up not only in the shadows of their father's conviction, but as direct victims of their father's abuse. And yet, the conversation about fatherhood really and mental health and people who need support and people who need to be protected rarely touches this territory. We talk about deadbeat dads, we talk about violence against women and girls, but we really, rarely talk about some of the things that happen to these boys whose fathers commit these crimes and also boys who are the victim of these crimes by their fathers, right? The uncomfortable truth is that these men exist and they are in our communities, whether we like it or not, and and some of them are still parenting, and many of their children are silently suffering. So I wanted to talk about some of the most common offenses that men are arrested for. So you've got sexual assault, which is any non-consensual sexual touching or groping. Then you've got rape, which is non-consensual penetration, often prosecuted under serious crime law. Child sexual abuse, which is any sexual activity including a minor, which is essentially anyone under the age of 16, which includes both and physical abuse and online grooming. You've also got the possession of indecent images of children being found. This is essentially anyone who's being found with child pornography, including images or videos stored digitally. You've got online grooming, which is using the internet to build trust with a child to later exploit or abuse them sexually. You've got voyeurism, which is secretly observing or recording someone without their consent for sexual gratification. This nowadays can mean things like hiding cameras. You've also got indecent exposure, which is intentionally exposing your genitals in public to cause alarm or distress. You've also got sexual communication with a child, which is sending sexual messages or content to someone under the age of 16. You've also got incest or familial sexual abuse, which is sexual activity with close relatives or abuse within families. You've also got revenge porn, and this includes distributing private sexual images without consent. And that can encompass sharing explicit photos or videos of someone without their consent. You've got sexual activity in a public place, right? Which is outraging public indecency, which is essentially, it says what it is on the tin, engaging in sexual acts in a public place. So that includes blowjobs, sex, um, fingering, any of that kind of stuff is included in this. Then you've also got soliciting and paying for sex with a minor. So that is attempting to or pay for sex with someone under the legal age. So that includes nowadays fit pic, feet pics. Any of that kind of stuff will come into this, and attempting to rape or attempted assault, sexual assault, which is where intent is proven and the act was not completed. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the other questions that you saw in the title, which is that why does seeing your father get arrested mess boys up so much? So the father is the first mirror for manhood. For many boys, their father or their father figure is their first model of what it means to be a man. How do I speak? How do I hold my ground? How do I protect, lead, and love? Even if the father is flawed, abusive, or distant, a boy still builds part of their identity around him. So to suddenly see this figure powerless, shamed, handcuffed, and then taken away can be what is called a psychological rupture. The boy might not be able to process it intellectually, but emotionally, it registers as if that's what happens to men, what will happen to me? If he is weak, is he evil? Is he weak? Well, if he is, what does that make me? But the other thing is it validates a core sense of safety and productivity. Children, especially those between the ages of 3 to 5, thrive on consistency and trust. They may believe that their dad is the strongest man in the world, or at least someone who can keep them safe. So when the police comes in, often with force, shouting, maybe even dragging him away in flips, it flips the world upside down for this young person. Certainly, the protector, Suddenly the protector is powerless. The home it becomes unsafe. Authority feels frightening, not protective. That instability plants a deep seed of fear, hypervigilance, and mistrust. And this then leads onto the fact that it can shatter their understanding of right and wrong. If the father is arrested for a serious crime like sexual abuse, the child may now face unbearable confusion. How can my dad be both my dad and a monster? If I still love him, does that make me bad too? This moral confusion can cause shame, self-hatred, long-term fragmentation, especially if other adults try to suppress the conversation or protect the father's image. And there is a lot of protecting a father's image. All right. And this child can then be in a conflict between I'm seeing this on the news, everybody's saying my dad is this, but I know my dad is this, but nobody's talking about it. And it just causes all kinds of issues. And witnessing that violence or arrest is so traumatic in itself. Clinical studies show that children who witness an arrest, especially of a parent, often display symptoms similar to PTSD. So they might have sleeping issues, panic attacks, aggression, or freezing or withdrawal. In a boy, especially, that trauma may not show as sadness, but as rage, acting out, or defiance. What's really happening is that he's overwhelmed, but doesn't have the language or the support to name what has happened. That arrest then often begins a domino effect. That arrest is not a one-time event. For many boys, it then becomes a trigger for many other things. So, for example, you have social stigma, financial instability, school performance starts to become an issue, mental health declines in the remaining parents, loss of an intended of extended family contact. He may not just lose his father, he may lose his identity, his routine, his relationships, and that sense of belonging all in one go. There's a lot that these young boys lose, right? And so what ends up then happening is that the boy often internalizes or he goes to the extreme, which is he imitates. This is really, really important because for many boys, they don't have this ability to separate themselves from their father. If dad is violent, arrested, hated, then the boy might think, I'll never be good enough. This is who I'll become too. I have to be tougher, harder, and scarier, right? It's a protective mechanism, is a protective a defense mechanism. Or, as I said, it will lead to the flip side where they may collapse inwards, believing that they're broken or doomed, leading to depression, self-harm, or substance use later down the road, or the extreme side of things, where, of course, some young people then decide that they're going to take their own life because they can't live with that shame. They can't live with feeling worthless. They can't live with feeling that they have no value, right? When that silence is louder than that arrest, you often then, after that father has been taken away, the house becomes really, really quiet. Family members, especially mothers or guardians, may avoid talking about what happened out of shame, confusion, or desperate need to protect the young person. This then might end up, people might end up saying things like his way working is too complicated for you to understand, or simply, in a lot of circumstances, everybody says nothing. But boys are not stupid. They notice the change. They feel the energy shift. And when no one explains it to them, they make up their own story. Often, that story doesn't go outwards. It typically turns inward. So they say things like, it must be my fault. I'm not allowed to talk about this. There's something wrong with my family. Vis-a-vis, there's something wrong with me. That unspoken pain, that silence becomes just as damaging as the arrest itself. It becomes a ghost in the room. You have to understand that a boy needs someone to help him put language to what happens, or it festers and mutates in his mind. You all know what happens when something happens to you and you don't have the language. I see this a lot with people who want to come out, but they can't come out. I mean, they're gay, they're lesbian, or something like this. And it literally starts to eat them alive. The lie starts to eat them alive because that unspoken pain, that silence, that not showing the world who they are it's really damaging to the mental health. So you have to remember that shame by association, there is a lot of shame by association, and that weight of the father's reputation can really impact a young person. Children, especially boys, often live under the shadow of their father's name. Right? In school, in the community, or even in extended families, they might be judged not by their own actions, but their father's action. They hear whispers, they get avoided, they may even get bullied. Isn't your dad that pedo? Right? I wouldn't go near him if I were you. He's probably just like his dad. This is identity damage by association. And let me tell you something, it's brutal, right? So one of the things that we do in therapy is that in therapy, some boys carry this weight like a secret badge. There is a mixture of rage, shame, fear, and they may reject their father outwardly, but inwardly they wonder, is this who I really am? Unless there is an intervention through mentoring, counseling, or a safe relationship, that shame can what's that word? Classify into lifelong distrust of people, of systems, and of course, of themselves. Right. And so that's kind of where we come in because there is a need to reparent and find new role models. When a father is arrested, what a boy often loses is not just the man, but the path, the sense of this is who I could become. So even if that path is flawed, it was there. Without a father, especially one which is removed, that's been removed through shame or crime, boys become unmoored. The message becomes no one is coming to teach you, figure it out for yourself. This is where you get hyper individuality, right? The boys are too scared to make contact. This is where they start isolating themselves. This is where they start using people because they get in this tug of war bit where they have biological needs that they've got to fulfill, and they have to basically sometimes go in and you will see a lot of these young people sort of sex and pornography becomes a thing because they have these biological needs they have to fulfill, but they don't want that contact, they don't want that intimacy, so they've got to shut themselves off. It's everything is like an act, it is a show, it is a facade, and no one is allowed to see who they are or how they actually are. So that's why reparenting matters. And as therapists, that's where we can come in. And that's why, as I said, I started Mailman's Counseling to be able to support boys and young men who are going through this kind of stuff, right? I think it's quite also important to talk a little bit about what growing up with a father on the sex register's offenders list is like. There's a particular kind of silence that follows boys whose fathers are on the sex offenders register. It's a kind of silence that doesn't just swallow words, it swallows identity, confidence, and belonging. These boys grow up in homes where the story is either whispered or completely buried, and yet their effects are loud. They echo through school corridors, friendships, bedrooms, romantic relationships, and adult lives, right? And I think the first thing that, and I've been talking a little bit about this, is to understand the shame. Imagine being a 10-year-old and sensing that your dad's name brings discomfort, that neighbors whisper, that teachers look at you differently. These boys often feel like they are inheriting a stain, a shame that they had no part in creating. Many of them change their last names. They lie about what their father is or simply cut ties to protect themselves. It's not just about avoiding judgment, it's really about survival, right? When your father's model of masculinity is someone who's labeled as a sex offender, how do you even form a healthy understanding of sex consent and trust? Some boys grow up hypersexual, as I said. Often they avoid anything sexual entirely. Some struggle with guilt about their own thoughts or attractions, even when they've done nothing wrong. They live with a fear of being, am I like him? Right? In many homes, the father's offense is never discussed. Children are expected to just get on with it, to accept, adjust, and never ask. But what this creates is an emotional vacuum. There are no words for grief, confusion, anger, or betrayal. So those emotions become buried. Right? They become buried deep. And when they do surface, it often looks like withdrawal, aggression, or anxiety, behaviors that are misunderstood or they're pathologized, right? For many boys, their father is the first template of what it means to be a man. But when that template is cracked or criminal, it leaves them without a map. Some go the opposite way to perfectionistic, over responsible, or obsessively moral. Others spiral, believing that they're destined to be messed up too, and they basically believe that they're going to end up exactly like their father ended up with. And then there is this issue of consent, because even when the boy hasn't told anyone, he often lives with a sense of being watched, as if people can just tell. This leads to a constant self monitoring. Don't act weird. Don't be too interested in girls. Don't say anything that makes people suspicious. Do you know how exhausting it is to live like that? And it robs them of the freedom to just be a kid, right? Um, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which I talked about at the very beginning, is social isolation and missed opportunities. Because of the restrictions or stigma, these boys might not be allowed to have friends over, attend certain clubs, or go to trips. They may miss out on sleepovers, football, or scouts. Things that seem small, but actually they shape a child's sense of normality and belonging. And over time, they begin to feel othered, different, and left out. And what do all teenagers want? All teenagers want to fit in. All teenagers want to belong. Some boys watch their fathers get arrested, and consequently, do you know what this becomes? They mistrust all authority figures, police, teachers, therapists. They learn, even like me, that client who I had, it took them 2 months to disclose this information to me. And that's me. And I'm a very empathetic person and I'm a very understanding person. So you can imagine that for the average person, they're not going to talk about this kind of stuff. This subject is so stigmatized that even therapists are judgmental. Even therapists, they judge the clients. There's a lot of therapists, I can tell you right now, even in my training, where I have therapists say, I don't want to work with anybody who is was involved with domestic violence, is a narcissist or anything like that. By the way, and that's their prerogative because you need to work within your competence. But it just goes to show you that even people who are training and have our professionals are really not being judgmental and not shaming people, even they find it hard to deal with this kind of stuff. This is part of the reason why, I wanted to really do male minds counseling and have a place where people can come to us and they can begin to just explore this stuff and unpack it. And I say that at Male Minds Counseling, I work from a pluralistic approach. And that essentially means that I don't believe in a one size fits all therapy. Every man, every boy needs different things. Some need to talk, some need structure, some need to break years of silence with a single sentence, right? He was my dad, but he destroyed everything. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment. So for us and for me, the first thing that I always try to do with everybody, which is why it took that client 2 months to disclose, is to really build trust. That means I'm consistent, I respect boundaries, I'm predictable. I am there every single week at the same time that we've agreed. Obviously, sometimes we may have to make changes or structures. And so, one of the things that I would say to people is if you are looking for a therapist who you're going to talk about this, and your father is on the sex offenders list register, what I would recommend to you is you find somebody who is consistent, somebody who is patient, somebody who respects boundaries, because there may be some things that you're not ready to talk about, right? The other thing is, one of the things that we try to do at Male Man's Counseling is try to name the trauma. Sometimes just putting words to the experience is powerful, right? I may say things like, you saw your father taken away and it shook your world. You've been living with questions no one's ever been able to help you answer. You have to understand that it's very validating to give the clients permission to understand that they're not crazy, that their feelings do make sense, that they've survived something massive, right? But also, I think one of the other things, if you are looking for therapists, that I try to do is understand that there's almost a contradiction when I'm working with clients who have gone through sexual violence or a rape or their father is on the sex register's offenders list. You have to understand that many times there is a multiplication and a contradiction of emotions. I love him, but I hate what he did. He taught me how to ride a bike, but he destroyed our family, right? Many boys carry a lot of guilt, but they still love the person. So one of the things that I think is really important, particularly which is why therapy is really important, is that it allows room for contradictions, for what in psychology is called cognitive dissonance. There's tug of war between is this person good or is this person bad, right? But the other thing as well that I think is really important to work on is identity. One of the most healing things therapy can offer is this message. You're allowed to define yourself. We explored things together. We explore what kind of man you want to be, what your values are and where they come from, what parts of your dad's legacy do you want to leave behind, and which do you want to keep, right? Through conversations and journaling and metaphors and storytelling, what I try to do is help boys and men reclaim um, authorship over their own story. And the other thing, particularly with the nervous system, is that we work with boys with their body. Some trauma lives beyond words. So we use grounding techniques, breathing exercises, mindfulness, and somatic awareness to help the client regulate their emotions, especially if that trauma shows up as anger, shutdown, or outbursts. But the other thing as well that I think is powerful is offering silence. In some families, the father's arrest became so taboo that no one talks about it. And in therapy, one of the things that we can do is that we can talk about what happened. We can talk about what wasn't said. What we can talk about what was lost. We know that unspoken pain does not just disappear. It just gets buried. It comes out sideways, right? And that's really, 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 really important for people to understand. So, boys and men who have had an arrested father for sexual offenses often feel like they don't belong anywhere. They're often too ashamed to speak, too angry to be still, too scared to trust, too proud to ask for help. But in therapy, the right therapy, they don't need to have all the answers. They just need to begin. And that is one of the things that we can do at Male Minds Counseling. So that's where I'm going to stop. Um, because I think I've talked a lot about a lot of things. Um, this again is a very taboo and stigmatized topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, that a lot of people don't want to discuss. But I do think the conversations need to be had. I think we do need to talk about it. So if you're online and you're like Kasim, yeah, you seem like an all right guy. I'll be very interested in, my dad's on the sex registered offenders list. I'd like to talk to you. I do online therapy and I also do in person in Reading in Berkshire, which is where I live. So please reach out to me at mailmindcounseling@gmail.com and we can have a conversation. But apart from that, thank you very, very much for listening. As usual, please like, subscribe, and all of that kind of stuff, and give me some positive stars. Um, yeah, it's a very complicated topic. that I've only touched on, but I just think it's really important for me to talk about it. Thank you very much for listening, and I will speak to you very soon. Bye for now.